What's up guys, I'm Chirag and welcome to part 34 of the tutorial series on Amazon API Gateway tutorial. In this tutorial, I will take you through the integration of the DynamoDB with API Gateway. So here we are going to have DynamoDB service as a backend of the API Gateway and not the Lambda function. So generally at the end of this tutorial, we will successfully integrate the DynamoDB with API Gateway and we will be able to insert data into the Dynamo table using API endpoint. So let's get started. So as you can see on my screen, these are the steps that we are going to follow throughout this tutorial, right? So we will start with the creation of the DynamoDB table, followed by the IAM role. So why we are creating the IAM role? Because API endpoint will require the permission to put data or insert data into the DynamoDB table. So that's the reason to give that permission. We are going to create the IAM role, which will be followed by the creation of the resource within the API endpoint or the API gateway. And finally, we will create the method and configure the same, right? So these are the very high level steps that we are going to follow throughout this tutorial. So let's get started with the very first step, that is creation of the DynamoDB table. So navigate to AWS Management Console, click on Services, search for DynamoDB. Now once you are within DynamoDB, click on Create Table. Now here we will give the table name. So I will say API demo, something like this, and we will define the primary key. So let's say ID, or you can name it whatever you want, right? And we will leave rest of the option as it is, and we will say create. Now here the table is being created. So let's wait. So now the API demo table is created successfully, right? So now we have accomplished the very first step. Now we will move on to the IAM Management Console to create the role. So click on Services, say IAM. Once you are within IAM Management Console, click on Policies from the left panel. So the reason we are clicking on policies is that we are going to create a policy over here, right? And after creating the policy, we are going to attach that policy within the role that we are going to create as the next step, right? So this is one of the way to achieve this, right? So within policy, basically we are going to define the DynamoDB put item access, right? And the other way around to achieve this is that directly navigate to roles, click on create role, select API gateway as a service and attach the DynamoDB full access policy, right? That is basically AWS managed or the predefined policy. But what will happen at that point of time is that the unnecessary permission will also be added along with the DynamoDB full access, right? And we don't want that. So that's the reason we are going to create this specific policy, and that policy we are going to attach with the role, so that we can give only those permission that is required by the API gateway to access or insert the data into the DynamoDB table, right? So that's the reason we are creating the custom policy. So now click on create policy. Now here we will simply follow the JSON structure. To generate a policy, we are going to use AWS policy generator. So navigate to this URL and we will create or generate the policy using this, right? Now within select type of policy, you need to select IAM policy. Now as a step 2, within effect, we are going to say allow, choose the AWS service. So here we are going to choose DynamoDB. That is Amazon DynamoDB. And within action, what we want to allow, since we need to insert some data into the DynamoDB table using API gateway, we need to allow put item, right? So select that permission, that is put item. Within ARN, you need to define or mention the ARN of the DynamoDB table that we have just created. So I will go back to the DynamoDB console, and from overview tab, scroll down at the very end and you will see the ARN of the table. So copy that and navigate back to the AWS policy generator and paste it over here and say add statement. And once you are done with this, click on generate policy and you will have your policy ready, right? So now all we need to do is that copy this policy, go back to IAM management console and paste it over here, right? And once you are done with this, click on review policy, give it a name. I will say API underscore DynamoDB and say create policy. Now once the policy is created, click on roles from the left panel, say create role, and here we need to select this service. So in this case we are going to select API gateway because we are creating this role for the API gateway, and click on next permission. So here by default one policy will be attached or assigned, that is Amazon API gateway push to CloudWatch logs, and we will not be able to select the custom policy. Let me try to search that. So it's not there. So maybe we will move on with this. Click on next tags, add a tag if you want, say next review, give it a name. I will say API underscore DynamoDB and say create role. Now once the role is created, open that role and here we will attach the policy. So click on attach policies. And now you can search for the custom policy that we have created. So that is something like this, that is API underscore Dynamo, right? So select that, say attach policy. And we are done, right? So we have API underscore DynamoDB policy attached with this role. Now we are done with the second step, that is creation of the IAM role. Now we will move on with the creation of the resource. So navigate to API gateway. So here in my case, I'm going to use API endpoint, right? So this is the API that I'm going to use. So you can use any existing API or you can go ahead and create a new one and create the resource within that API, right? So here, once you are there within the API endpoint, right, click on resources from the left panel, click on action, say create resource, right? So give it a resource name. I will say put Dynamo data, something like this, right? And say create resource. Now once the resource is created, click on action, say create method. Now here the method is going to, the method is going to be the post, and click on this tick mark because we want to send some data, we want to send some payload, and we want that payload to be inserted within the Dynamo table, right? So that's where we are selecting or creating the post method, right? Now it's asking us for the integration type. So here instead of Lambda function, we are going to select AWS service, select the AWS region. So in my case, it's US East 1. Then you need to select the AWS service. That's going to, of course, the DynamoDB. We will leave the AWS subdomain blank. Now within HTTP method, it's going to be the post, right? And as an action type, we are going to select use action name, and we will name the action that we want to perform. So here what we want to perform, we want to put an item within DynamoDB table, right? So it's going to be the put item. So that's the action that we want to perform. Now here it's asking for the execution role. So here we need to go back to IAM management console and copy the ARN of the IAM role that we have created, right? So copy and paste it over here, and rest of the option we will leave it as it is. Now once you're done with this configuration, say save. Now once the method is created, what is the last step that we need to perform? That is configuration of the method. So we have to configure the mapping templates over here. So navigate to integration request, click on mapping templates. So here we will select the second option, that is when there are no templates defined, and we will say add mapping template. We will define content type as application/JSON and click on this tick mark. Right, so basically mapping templates enables you to define the request structure that your API will use, right? And then it will basically transform those requests into the structure that the DynamoDB API put item requires, right? So here what we are doing is that we are using mapping templates to transform the request in a way that DynamoDB can understand, right? So that's what we are doing within this mapping templates. So here we will define, we will say curly braces, right? So the very first thing that we will define is the table name, right? Colon followed by the table name. So it's a good idea to mention or state the table name as static, but you can also fetch the table name or set the table name dynamically, right? Based on the request. But in my case, I will set it static, right? So in my case, it's going to be the API demo, right? So copy, paste, and we will define the item, right? So item is something that we want to insert, right? So item colon curly braces, a dictionary followed by key value pair, right? So we have defined ID, so we will say ID, right? Colon again curly braces followed by the data type, so it's going to be the string data type, colon what we want to insert. So now that is something that we are going to grab dynamically, right? So I will simply say dollar context dot request ID, right? So just to keep it unique, I am just entering or inserting request ID within the ID column, right? Followed by another key value pair. So let's say I want to enter some message, colon. Now the same structure we will follow, copy, paste. Now I want to pass on the payload from the front end, and I will pass on one of the parameter, that is message, and I want to fetch that value of the message from the payload and insert it into the DynamoDB, right? So for that we will say dollar input dot JSON. It should be input dot JSON parenthesis followed by single quotes, and then we will say dollar dot message. So here message is going to be the key of the payload that we are going to pass from the front end, right? So for example, you are passing the JSON data as comment, colon, and the value, and you want to fetch the value of that comment. Then instead of message, you need to mention comment, right? So whatever the key that you want to fetch from the payload, that is going to be defined here, right? So that is $.message. And let's say one more thing we want to insert, that is token, for example, colon. Similarly, I will copy this and paste it over here. Again, I want to fetch that from the payload, or let's say I want to fetch that from the query string parameter. So to fetch or to access the query string parameter, we need to say input dot params parenthesis single quote followed by the name of the query string, right? So let's say token, right? Or it can be token value, for example, right? So these are the three things that we want to insert into the API demo table using API endpoint, right? So now once you're done with this configuration of the method of the mapping templates, click on save. And now I think we are good to go, right? So we have configured method execution, that is integration request. Now if you remember, then we had defined query string parameter as token, right? So if you want to validate that whether the user or the client has passed the token value or not, you might go ahead and add the URL query string parameter over here. So let's add it. Let's say token value, that is what we have added, right? And click on this tick mark, and let's say you want to make it mandatory, so check this box. And you also want API gateway to validate that whether user has passed the token value or not, right? So for that, click on this pencil mark next to the request validator and say validate query string parameters and headers, right? And say click on this tick mark. So this will basically validate whether the token value has been passed or not. If that is not passed, then it will not forward the request to the next step, right? So it will throw an error from this step itself. So that's all, and now we are good to deploy this API. So click on action, say deploy API, select the deployment stage and say deploy. Now the API is deployed, we are good to test this. So copy this invocation URL, we will go back to Postman. So let me bring Postman up. Here it is. Paste the invocation URL followed by the resource name. So what was the resource name? That is, let me see. That is put Dynamo data. Let me copy that and paste it over here. Select post as a method, and here within headers we are going to pass JSON, that is application/JSON, right? Content type application /JSON, and we want to pass the raw body and the JSON payload. So the very first that we want to pass is message, right? Colon its value, hello. What was the other thing that we wanted to pass? Let me have a look at the mapping template. So we want to pass ID, it's going to be the request ID, and then message and the token, right? So token is something that we are going to pass as a part of the query string parameter. So I will say question mark after the resource, and I will say token value equal to ABC, or maybe let's put it SRCECDE, right? And let's say send. So it returns status code 200, but along with the exception. So let's have a look. Let me go back to mapping templates. Oh, so we need to put this query string value within double quotes. So make sure you put it in double quotes. And while we are fetching data, or while we are accessing the key value pair from the payload, then it's going to be like this. But if you are fetching value from the query string parameter, it's going to be the double quote, right? So let's save this and redeploy the API. deployment stage, version 1, deploy. Now let's try again, send. So now as you can see, it returns status code 200 without any exception with the blank or empty braces. So let's go back to the DynamoDB table, click on items. So now here, as you can see, we have the value that is ID and the message as hello, token as srcecde, right? So this is how you can insert or put an item within DynamoDB table. So let's try something else. Let's not pass the query string parameter, because if you remember, then we had set the validation. So let me remove this and try to say send. So now as you can see, it returned an error saying missing required request parameters, that is token value. So it's mandatory to pass that value. So let me put it again back. Let's try to insert one more record. So instead of hello, let's say world, and token value as token, something like this, and we will say send. Again, it returns status code 200. It means it's successful. Let's reload this, and as you can see, we have another record saying world and the token, right? So this is how you can insert the data. Now for example, let's say you are not passing any payload. What will happen? Will it throw an error? Let's try this. We cannot skip query string parameter because we had set the validation on the API endpoint, right? But we can pass on without payload because we are not validating the body, right? So let's see. Let's say send. So it returns status code 200 and it is successful. Now if we look at the record within DynamoDB, then as you can see, it inserted the request ID or the ID. We didn't pass any message, so it is empty, and we pass on the token value as token, and it is being inserted, right? So if you are not passing any payload and you are fetching the data within mapping templates from the payload, so that's going to be empty if you are not passing it, right? So well, that's all I wanted to cover in this tutorial, and as usual, if you want me to do tutorial on any use case or service, then please leave them below and I will try my best to come up with the tutorial as soon as possible. And if you have any queries or comments, then again please leave them below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.